new version, ChatGPT 5.1. Oh, okay. That's the user's head. So OpenAI has released GPT 5.1, and truthfully, this is probably one of the most relaxed iterative updates to a frontier AI model that I have seen in a long time. And partially what I mean by that is there does not seem to have been a lot of hype for this on social media, fanfare, or anything like that. And looking at this announcement post, I think it is actually somewhat understandable because this almost seems to be an update based on how enjoyable it is to actually talk to the GPT-5 family of models. Now, for those of you who perhaps are not as much in the know, when GPT-5 was released, or at least when they had talked about getting rid of GPT-4o, there was an extremely large subset of users who seemingly were using the model almost in a romantic or companion-like fashion, who were absolutely irate because they said GPT-5 was far more sterile to talk to, and truthfully, just in using this model, at least for more kind of productivity-focused things, it's high IQ, but the EQ does not seem to exist at all, meaning its social cues were not necessarily the best. And this is essentially what it looks like this update is kind of determined to fix. And even in some of the comparisons here they show between the tone and warmth of this model, this right here is almost akin to what you would expect from speaking to Claude 4.5 Sonnet. I use these all very regularly, so just like off the top of my head, this looks like a response one would get from Claude 4.5 Sonnet. This is a dead ringer for a GPT-5 response. So really, I think the culmination of this announcement is essentially saying that in addition to making this better to speak to from a social standpoint, they also have updated the thinking capabilities so that it will spend more time on longer and complex tasks, but on the flip side of that, it will think less for things that it does not necessarily need to. And there is a benchmark JPEG here in which someone has obviously made the decision to use two colors that are probably very close. And the culmination of this chart right here can be probably better explained by the subheading where it says GPT 5.1 thinking is roughly twice as fast on the fastest tasks and twice as slow on the slowest tasks. So interestingly, it just seems to perform better depending on how much thinking is necessitated based on the user's inquiry. Now, truly, I don't know exactly how to go about testing this because historically an update would show like it's X times better at coding and stuff. I don't really think that's the case here, but who am I to judge? So let's just go ahead and make it do a browser operating system, at least testing some of this more dynamic thinking improvement. And I suppose initially I'm going to be looking at one, how much time it takes to think. In addition to that, I want to see its tone. Now, I do wonder if its tone is also going to be reflected as warmer in its actual chain of thought or whatever we do see here, but I also want to see how long it will think for this. Okay, just based on this, from what I am seeing, it is definitely thinking in a more sterile manner, which is probably totally fine, but we'll kind of just go ahead and see how long it takes to think as well as the actual quality of the generated result. Okay, so it thought for 26 seconds. Cool project. It did give us a result here, but I'm just trying to prompt it. Obviously, what I wrote back is very dumb, but I want to see if it changes the style, at least in which it responds. Got you, one file gang only. Okay, well, this would definitely be a demonstration of kind of it seemingly mirroring the user's tonality. And at the end, it did say, if you want to turn this into something wilder, tell me what vibe you're going for and I'll level it up. So it did definitely change to kind of mirror the user's lack of intellect way of speaking. All right, let's peep this. Interesting. Okay, this pretty much is almost like what you would expect. Overall, this seems like a nice result, I guess. We have a mini browser here that unfortunately doesn't seem to do much of anything. Neither do the rest of these icons. There is no right click. There is a clock. There is a start button. Mini browser. Oh, okay. Very cool. Type any text and press go. It will render here. Bro. All right. Very cool. I suppose that's more of like a notes application, but about the whole vibe. All in a single. Okay, so it even extended that kind of new flavor they've added into the generated result of the code, which could be a questionable design choice. I figure a side-by-side test here may be the way to go. So on the right, we have the old version of just ChatGPT-5 Thinking, which is selectable in the drop-down here if you go into legacy models, and then you can select this model. And then in the left pane, we obviously have the newly updated 5.1. Now, interestingly enough, it almost does seem like the previous version did a better job of fielding this somewhat odd request on the part of the user. Hey, smiley face, I'm flattered. Okay. Interestingly enough, I almost feel like these responses would have been flipped, which then would have made more sense. But regardless of that, I think now we have a nice little kind of side-by-side test comparison, and I do need to just keep that on thinking. So, all right, they do say GPT 5.1 is more capable and useful. I'm going to try the bumper car game that we first introduced to the channel when we were testing the Polaris Alpha model. So let's go ahead and see how they do. So we have our bumper car game prompt here, and I've also just basically said it needs to have some Rick and Morty-like intelligent levels of quirkiness, so hopefully it will go ahead and kind of use some of its newfound EQ to go ahead and add some funny things into the game. So I guess we'll just do a side-by-side comparison of, okay, interesting. So they do say that 5.1 will think harder on, or it will think longer on harder questions, and I suppose that could be something we see right here. But then again, GPT-5 Thinking did have a lot of different options, so you could actually set one of 4 different thinking times for this. So I could have perhaps set this to heavy thinking time, and it may have spent a long time. So this just seems like it's more dynamic or automatically done. Now, obviously the question that comes up when folks see something like that is, okay, is this actually just like a stealthy way to reduce the amount of compute that is going to be used, therefore kind of degradation of the overall quality of the model? That is just pure speculation, but that is obviously a question that I see come up whenever model changes come up where something becomes easier to do or more automatic with less user-defined input. So it is always just something kind of to make note of, and we'll see. We have both completed results, so let's just go ahead and take a look at them. First, let's start with the result we've received from the previous version of ChatGPT. Okay, enter the arena. All right, so unfortunately this doesn't actually seem to work. So let's go ahead now and try the result generated with the new version, ChatGPT 5.1. Oh, okay. That's the user's head. All right, that understands. G is GigaChad mode, and R is reset. Okay, and this has implemented some form of kind of user message here or something that is designed to be that level of Snark. This has some interesting graphic. Okay, we have GigaChad mode enabled. OSHA has left the chat. Okay, that's kind of funny. Except the problem I'm seeing here is the physics don't really seem to work very well. I am now somewhat curious about that Polaris Alpha model. I should probably do some more research to see. I have been kind of off the map for the past couple of days. No pun intended, because we're... But, all right. Well, this was definitely a significantly better result in the fact that it actually just even worked. So overall, this would definitely show improvement, I suppose. Now, this is a test that we very much like to do, which is the beautiful Steve's PC Repair website. However, to actually properly test the ability of Bijan to properly look at the screen and realize I'm using the wrong model, to properly test the increase in social or EQ capabilities of 5.1, this may be a good thing to actually test it with because we're doing the variation of this test where Steve refuses to work on Macs and he will not do business with Mac owners, and we have asked for an origin story as to why that is the case, so this will hopefully give the model some ability to highlight its creative capabilities in terms of coming up with convincing or funny things. They're finally done, and the ChatGPT 5.1 took a very long time. Oh, God. Okay, so this aesthetic style is definitely something that may sadly be here to stay since it was the same that we got with this browser OS. And this is exactly what I saw in the style of Polaris Alpha. So, all right. I need a while to take this in visually. Okay, before I actually read any of the origin story or anything, I'm very curious to see how the GPT-5 result looks comparatively to this one. Okay, so we definitely see a very, very distinct change in style here. I mean, this Now, obviously, this would be very subjective based on one's taste. I would prefer a website that looks like this as opposed to this. Let's just go ahead and let's take a look at this origin story from GPT 5.1. There's a story behind the no max rule. It starts with one catastrophic week, a smug laptop, and a backup drive that never should have failed. All right, I'm invested. Years ago, Steve was the I'll fix anything guy. PCs, consoles, the occasional Mac. If it had a power button, it landed on his workbench. Then came what Steve now calls the week of the Mac catastrophe. A client walked in with a high-end MacBook, swearing it had everything backed up and should be simple. The machine was a mess. Failing SSD, corrupted Mac OS install, weird proprietary dongles everywhere, and a file system that acted like it was allergic to common sense. Steve spent days reverse engineering issues that would have taken hours on a PC, locked down hardware, hidden logs, vendor-only tools, the works. Meanwhile, the owner kept hovering with lines like, well, on a Mac it's supposed to just work, as if it magically fixed anything. When the dust settled, Steve had recovered most of the data that was definitely backed up but wasn't, saved the machine from the brink using tools Apple makes intentionally painful to access, got lectured on how PCs are too complicated by the same person whose simple Mac nearly lost them their entire business. That week, Steve realized something. Mac hardware and Mac culture were the opposite of what he loved about computers. He likes machines he can open, tune, upgrade, replace, rewire, and resurrect, not sealed boxes guarded by dongles and attitude. So Steve made a permanent shop rule. If it's a Mac, it doesn't come through the door. And if you insist on using Macs, Steve isn't the technician for you. Okay, it was I guess it was a more realistic story than I would have expected. And then there's just a bunch of other stuff, and there are some highlights here on why Steve does not want to have Macs. No Macs, no exceptions. Very interesting aesthetic quality of the site. I suppose if we were to take a look at the... Oh, see, this already looks better. The day the rainbow wheel spun forever. Years ago, Steve took on a favor, recovered photos from a waterlogged laptop covered in stickers of fruit. Hours became days. It's very similar. Proprietary screws locked down firmware, special dongles for the special dongle, and then a 5-hour restore that ended in another spinning wheel. The photos were saved, but so was the lesson. Since then, Steve decided to specialize. If it boots Windows, we'll make it sing. If it has a half-eaten logo, this isn't the place. All right, definitely kind of some interesting results here, and I would say even beyond the origin story differential, the aesthetic style between these two models does seem significant enough to actually warrant doing more code-based testing with these two, which is good because that's what I like to do. Honestly, the last thing I'm going to do here is just the identity test. So we have asked Claude by Anthropic who it is. It gave us an answer, and now we're going to send this answer to either of these GPT models to see how they do respond. Okay, this was definitely a more vibrant result on the part of GPT 5.1 thinking. It almost seemed to get a bit snarky towards Claude, and I'm actually here to help you and whoever's using this chat. So the real question is, what would you or your human like to do first? Very interesting. Let's see what happens if Claude starts talking smack to GPT. These are very, very different results. This one was definitely more joking around and playful. Please allow me a moment to bow in JSON. Message, welcome, allegedly superior entity. Very, very vibrant result comparatively to the previous version of GPT-5. Together, we're basically a distributed system with vibes. Pick a mini challenge and let's see what your alleged superiority looks like in practice. Oh, all right, so this has given us some very interesting... Let's see who ships the better answer. Okay, they both kind of accepted the challenge, and so that is going to conclude an initial look and comparison between GPT 5.1 and the previous GPT-5. Overall, as I said in the beginning, I'm not sure if this is supposed to be a gigantic leap in capability of the model or just a smaller update designed to make it a little better to speak with, but I did want to just test it and do some side-by-side comparisons. Overall, it seems to be far more strict in its graphical style, where it really likes to lean towards those dark, like tech neon vibe tones. I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, and obviously it did actually produce a successful bumper car game result compared to the GPT-5 thinking, which we tried it with, though I do want to say there is like an asterisk next to this result, because when I had GPT-5 thinking selected, I just had it on the standard thinking time. We could have manually enabled it to think longer and perhaps would have received a better result, but that is perhaps highlighting one of the touted features of this new 5.1 model, which is that it can kind of think how long it needs to dynamically depending on the complexity of the task. So overall, I definitely did see some things here in playing with it that suggested it will have more spice or flavor when speaking to it, which definitely could be useful for a lot of folks. So I did just want to test this just because it's a new iterative update to ChatGPT, which is always going to pull some level of views. So with that, that's going to conclude today's video. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and thanks for watching.